Now, I hate stereotypes and I hate cultural biases, racial biases, but Asians are the best at action. I'm sorry. Rurouni Kenshin The Legend Ends is once again directed by Keiichi Otomo and once again stars Takeru Sato as Kenshin Himura and Tatsuya Fujiwara as Shishio. And in Rurouni Kenshin The Legend Ends, Kenshin Himura is training with his old master to figure out how to beat this Shishio guy, while Shishio is amassing an army, continues to amass an army, and sends out an ultimatum to the government asking for Kenshin Himura's execution. Now, as I mentioned somewhere in my reviews for the last two Rurouni Kenshin movies, this entire trilogy ends with the Shishio arc. You know, if you're a hardcore fan of the manga and the anime, like it does not go to that arc after Shishio, like that people don't really like. This ends here. And I just want to say that I was really excited for this movie. Kyoto Inferno ended with this gigantic cliffhanger, and you know I watched the trailer and it just looked so good. But I'd like to think I'm good at stripping myself of expectations before going into a movie, so I was excited for it, but I went in expecting nothing. Now, one of my friends here on YouTube compared the first Rurouni Kenshin to the way Christopher Nolan did, you know, the Batman trilogy, and I can see that why that comparison makes sense. But I saw Kyoto Inferno more as The Hobbit: Desolation of Smaug because it was darker. It ended on a cliffhanger. It really set up something that promised to be really epic and stuff. But the movie I will compare The Legend Ends to is actually Transformers Dark of the Moon. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie is much better than Dark of the Moon, but what I mean by that is that this movie, like, it's worth the price of admission, like, the last 30-40 minutes alone. Like, that last section is just, it's mind-blowing. It's just that you have to get through a lot of stuff to get to those last 30-40 minutes. Now, a lot of things I'll say about this movie will be the same as my comments for Kyoto Inferno because, you know, these movies were released like a month apart and they're very similar. So the visual effects in this movie are still very good. When you have CGI, it still looks great. It's not as good as in the last movie because the effects are bigger, they're shown longer, but they're still decent. They're not groundbreaking, but they're decent, like Shishio's gunship or a bunch of explosions that happen. There's not a lot of new environments in this movie because, you know, the movie still does take place in pretty much Tokyo and Kyoto, but you know there's still lots of great attention to detail in the production design, and again all these places where they fight and stuff, they feel like video game levels in the best sense of the word. You know, like the environments are really put to good use. You can feel like there's a layout, and of course the cinematography is still absolutely breathtaking. The colors are super vivid, everything is so crisp and clear, especially the parts where Kenshin's training with his master in the forest. Those forest shots are just breathtaking. And thankfully all the fights are very clear and they look great. They're not gone is the bit of shaky cam that was in Kyoto Inferno, so you know you can tell the cinematographers are standing in there in the scene with cameras, you know, handheld cameras, but it's all very steady. But this movie also still looks great in the smaller details. You know, the costumes are still very consistent with the source material. They really go beyond feeling just like cosplay. They really feel like they're put together. You know, except maybe the 10 swords, like you don't really see a lot of them, so spoiler kind of, that if you were like really looking forward to them, they're not really in this movie at all, and they kind of look like cosplay, but everyone else looks fine. The makeup is still great in this movie. It really makes you feel their pain when, you know, people start getting bloodied up. You feel like they're gonna die pretty soon. And I really just want to emphasize the importance of makeup, especially in action movies. It really helps sell the illusion, and in fact, good makeup can make you care so much about certain characters that you wouldn't really care about if the writing was weak, but the makeup really kind of helps make up for that. But no pun intended. The sound design is still brutal. You feel every single hit, especially with Kenshin's reverse-edged sword. Like, it still feels really painful even if he's not killing you. And, you know, we have a cool new toy here. We have Shishio's flaming sword thing, which is just awesome. Like, you don't even challenge the logic of it. Like, how does it happen? Who cares? It's a flaming sword. Takeru Sato as Kenshin Himura still does a great performance. He really just delves deeper and deeper into Kenshin's dark side at the certain points where it feels like Kenshin seems more killer than human, and that's great because you do care about this guy at this point and you don't want him to go that far down. And you feel like this dude is broken for life now because he's gotten less and less happy as these movies have been going along, and you know he really just it feels like he has the weight of the world on his back. Tatsuya Fujiwara finally gets like a real chance to shine as Shishio though. Like he really conveys the madness within this guy. I mean, in the last movie you knew he was scary, but here you can tell he's very theatrical. and he's really really strong and ultra powerful, but at the same time you can feel his uncontrollable vengeance, you know, like he'd rather have revenge on these people than care for his own health and well-being and stuff. But you know, he's also very surprisingly vulnerable in this movie. Like you get the sense that this guy has been burned all over his body, and that's not just something you walk away from. And of course, the director Keiichi Otoma adds visual grace to every single shot in this movie, especially like the very first scene in this movie, which is kind of like a flashback to the very past. I thought like the way these shots were constructed were just, you know, there's so much to take in, and it was great. But of course, we gotta talk about the fighting because that's what you go to these movies for. The fighting in this movie is probably the best it's ever been in this series. What's great is that The Legend Ends has the speed and the clarity and the great editing of the first movie, and combines it with the scale and the ferocity of the fights in Kyoto Inferno. So what you have is just pretty much like the best thing ever. And like I said, the last 30 to 40, 45 minutes of this movie are completely worth the price of admission. There's a certain point where the action begins, and from then on out just does not stop. And it's just, it makes you want to cry if you're an action fan. It's just that good. What's so great about Keiichi Toma as an action director, he never really repeats the same tricks, you know, like yeah, there's some elements like people running with wires and stuff, but you know, it never feels like he's rehashing things. Like what's so great is that he uses the environment so well. No matter where he is, he just finds places for these characters to climb on and jump from, and you know, it really adds flow to the fights. You know, it feels like this is like a dance. The choreography is amazing, and you must have seen it in the trailer by now, but there is a 4-on-1 fight. Shishio, Kenshin, Sano, Saito, and Aoshi. My god. However, again, while the action in these last 30-45 minutes is incredible, there are lots of problems in this movie also, unfortunately. It really take it a couple notches down. First of all, I think the first act is kind of wasted because a lot of the time spent is spent, you know, just kind of following Kenshin as he tries to learn like a new move, and everyone else isn't really doing anything in the movie. And I feel like they could have chopped this down a lot just to, you know, allow for these other characters to be developed. And that's my other problem with this movie, is that there's like zero character development in this movie. Like at a certain point, you realize that, you know, Kaoru and Sano and Yahiko and stuff, like there's nothing, you don't know anything about them. Small problem also with the music. I think it gets a bit too blaring and over dramatic at a lot of points. Like it's still good. It's just that it's just there too much. You know, there are lots of moments that could have been fine without music at all. But really, the biggest problem in this movie is the writing. Again, zero character development. There's something with the dialogue here that gets too cartoony at a lot of points. You know, like it's weird to have live action people saying anime things, and there's a way to do it correctly, but here it just really came off as really cartoony and unnecessary. But probably the most unforgivable thing is that the plot in this movie really just doesn't really make a lot of sense. You know, Shishio's plan to overthrow the government is so vaguely defined. You just know that he rolls up in a giant ship and starts blasting people and sending ultimatums to the government. You don't really understand what his concrete plan is, if he has one at all. If he doesn't have one, he's a bad villain. Then lots of characters show up at completely random points. There's actually a point in the movie where a character shows up and you have no idea how that person got there, and someone asks, wait, how did you get here? And the character literally says, oh, never mind that, by the way. So they just completely just went around the issue of how did this character end up here when it should not be that easy. And this movie has terrible closure also. Like, after the end of the amazing action, that huge chunk of action, the very end of this movie, it just ends with a, you know, it just fizzles out, unfortunately. So you really don't get closure for pretty much any of these characters. So unfortunately, because of that, I would say that Rurouni Kenshin: The Legend Ends is just an okay movie. I still think there's more good in it than bad. It's just that you really have to get through a lot of the bad to get to the amazing. However, I do have to give kudos to Keiichi Otomo and this entire cast and crew for making a pretty much more or less consistent anime adaptation, and this is actually a great feat because hopefully again we will get more like really serious anime adaptations in the future. And really, I just got so excited watching this because imagine the people working on this movie teaming up with the people who worked on The Raid, and imagine them making like the best action movie ever. Like, it would be a renaissance. Anyway, so that's my review for Rurouni Kenshin: The Legend Ends. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.